I'll just begin by saying thank you to the Toledo Museum of Art for creating a space for us to think about art in a wonderfully dynamic way, and that is through the lens of chess. I would also like to thank the Toledo Museum of Art for providing space for conversations like the one we will have this afternoon with extraordinary individuals who have traveled all the way from Florida, where it's warm, all the way from Nigeria, where it is also warm, to join us in today's program. I know that we have visitors online, visitors here in the room. What we hope for this afternoon is just a candid conversation about the interplay between chess and art and life, and how the constant need to negotiate the world around us is ever present in everything that we do. My name is Dr. Lanisa Kitchiner. I am the curator of African art here at the Toledo Museum of Art, and I can share with you without any pause that I've had the privilege to serve in some other institutions that have esteemed legacies of their own, but that the Toledo Museum of Art, under the directorship of Adam Levine and Andrea Gardner, is truly making all the right moves to raise the profile and to heighten understanding about the depth, the diversity, and the beauty of African art. So without any further ado, again, thank you to the Toledo Museum of Art and to the wonderful team under Duffy Maddox's leadership that is here recording and putting bright lights and good sound and all the great things in this great hall this afternoon. I'll ask our panelists to join us, and as they do, after they do, I will read their bios so that you have an even greater sense of who they are and why we are so lucky to have them here with us. So I will begin with the artist extraordinaire, Emmy Award-winning artist, Modupeola Fadugba. Modupeola, would you join us on the stage, please? And I just love her. And then also, all the way from Nigeria, oh my goodness, Tunde Onakoya. Please join us on the stage. And then, of course, from Florida, I think by way of Singapore and wherever else he may have traveled most recently, we have Maurice Ashley. Maurice, would you please join us? Now, I am going to actually read a portion of their bios. I'm not going to do all of their bios because they'd be simply too long for us to get through this afternoon. But I think just a sneak peek, if you don't know who they are, just a sneak peek might be helpful to get a sense of why we're so delighted to have this group of esteemed individuals here with us in Toledo, Ohio today. So I will start with Modupeola. Modupeola is a self-taught multimedia artist known for her work in painting, drawing, and socially engaged installations. With a multidisciplinary background in engineering, economics, and education, her art explores intersections of cultural identity, social justice, game theory, and the socio-political dynamics of Nigeria within the global economy. Her acclaimed project, The People's Algorithm, a game-based installation fostering dialogue on improving Nigeria's education system, earned her the Outstanding Production Prize from El Anatsui and the Grand Prize at the 2016 Dakar Biennale. Dreams from the Deep End, completed in 2018, Her recent multimedia exhibition delves into the collective experiences of swimmers, examining America's racialized swimming history and exploring themes of collaboration and resilience. The project was exhibited at Gallery 1957 in Accra, Ghana, and documented in a film that received an Emmy Award in 2022 for outstanding long-form DEI content. The documentary was also screened at the Brooklyn Museum and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York. Modupeola has participated in prestigious residencies, including the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African Arts Research Fellowship, the International Studio and Curatorial Program in Brooklyn, and she also had a fellowship in Paris. She is also an Archbishop Tutu Leadership Fellow. Modupeola's works are part of significant collections, including the Smithsonian Institution, the Minneapolis Institute of Art, and the Sindika Dokolo Foundation. And also on Facebook, in Facebook's permanent collection, where she completed the commissioned piece Indigo Reflection in 2021. Modupeola currently lives and practices between Abuja, Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Again, welcome, Modupeola. Now, I have the high honor and privilege of sitting next to Tunde, who is a Guinness World Book Award winner. Tunde is a Nigerian chess player and coach who again holds the Guinness World Records for the longest marathon chess game. He is the founder and convener of Chess in Slums Africa, which organizes a number of interventions for children across Lagos State, including Majidun, Makoko, and recently Oshodi. Onakoya learned to play chess at a barber shop in a slum in Lagos, where he grew up. Being unable to play for his secondary school, his mother offered to work for a school as a cleaner in exchange for his school fees. He would later be ranked as the number 13 chess player in Nigeria. Onakoya got a diploma in computer science at Yaba College of Technology, where he was a gold medalist representing the school in Nigeria Polytechnic Games and also the RCCG Chess Championship. He has also won the National Friends of Chess and the Chevron Chess Open. He was featured in CNN, African Voices, and he is a board member of the New York City-based nonprofit, The Gift of Chess. Last but not least, we have Maurice Ashley. Maurice Ashley lives his passion and brings it to audiences around the globe. As the first African-American Grandmaster in chess history, Maurice is celebrated not only for his groundbreaking achievements, but also for his exceptional ability to inspire, engage, and forge meaningful connections with his audience. A master of ceremonies, a motivational speaker, and dynamic communicator, he electrifies audiences worldwide with presentations that blend sharp insight, strategic brilliance, and undeniable charisma. Maurice's engaging live commentary has made him a standout voice in the world of chess. His unapologetic, Brooklyn-rooted style paired with ESPN caliber sports analysis has redefined how audiences experience chess, turning tournaments into exciting showcases. Beyond the board, Maurice is a sought-after speaker who delivers transformative lessons on how chess principles can sharpen decision-making, elevate business practices, and fuel personal growth. Whether addressing executives, educators, or aspiring students, his talks resonate deeply, leaving audiences inspired to think strategically and act decisively. Maurice is also the founder of the Maurice Ashley Fellowship, a groundbreaking initiative aimed at expanding opportunities for underrepresented chess players and fostering the next generation of champions. With multiple community service awards to his name, he continues to travel the world, translating his love of chess into a legacy of inspiration and innovation. He has received recognition from city governments, universities, and community organizations for his tireless advocacy of the game's life-changing impact. Maurice Ashley is a 3-time national championship coach, an author, an app designer, a puzzle inventor, and a tireless advocate for the transformative power of chess. He has been inducted into the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame and the Brooklyn Technical High School Hall of Fame for his extraordinary contributions to the game. Thank you for joining us, Maurice.
Thanks for having me.
So to give you a sense of how this afternoon will flow, we'll have just short, brief presentations from each of our panelists, a quick round of questions that I'll pose to each of them, and then we'll open it up to you and to our audiences online so that we might have an interactive discussion about their respective perspectives on connections between chess and art, chess and chess, and chess and life. And since Modupeola is featured in the exhibition, I think it's appropriate to just turn to you, Modupeola, to give us a bit of an introduction to all of the above: chess and chess, art and chess, strategy and chess, life and art, however you choose.
Thank you, Lanisa. Yeah. I'll gladly take the opening. That land well? The openings? Yeah, okay, good. And thank you for those lovely introductions, which I promise you was the short version, having interacted with these two legends in their own right. Firstly, thank you for all coming out and spending your Saturday afternoon with us. We're super grateful. I see some museum docents back there, my favorite people in the museum. Yes, I am here by way of art. My work is featured in the exhibition Strategic Interplay, and it is a series that I created in 2013, shortly after finishing grad school and deciding grad school in education, after studying engineering and economics, and then deciding I wanted to be an artist, kind of on a whim, guided by a hunch. And I created a series called Chief and His Wives. And in that series, there is an African or Yoruba chief who has 5 wives. And for some reason, they decide to leave him and tell him to take back whatever it is they feel is a value that the chief has placed on them. And I've depicted this game, or this interaction, or this negotiation, so to speak, with all of the players on a checkered chessboard. Sitting with these 2 experts, as someone who still doesn't know how to play chess, I was joking earlier that I invited Tunde around to my place in Lagos, and I said, hey, we have this thing in Toledo. I should probably know how to play chess, and I don't. So can you teach me some of the basics of the game? And Tunde, what happened? What happened when you came?
We just ended up drinking champagne, and that was it.
It was all vibes, so I still remain completely ignorant about the game, but I know it is about strategy. I know that there are queens, and I'm trying to dress like one today.
You did good, you did good.
No, but seriously, I really did take the idea of like art inspiration. If you know the Nigerian photographer J.D. Okereke, who photographs these really beautiful Nigerian traditional hairstyles. So I went and got this done last week. And if you look at the works as well, the pieces are depicted as busts and really sort of sculptural hairstyles. And so I think this is sort of my lens into this discussion about chess. I have learned 2 things from dinner with you and with Tunde. Tunde said something, and whose brilliant, amazing work in education in Nigeria, looking at chess as a way to give young children like this very intellectual identity. And he said something that really stuck with me yesterday, which is that hope is not a strategy. And we come from a country where I think we really get by on hope, right? It has been a strategy. And one can say a losing one, but in some ways, I don't know if that's what's holding us together in Nigeria. But I took that from our discussions. And with you, move by move, thinking about making decisions strategically and swiftly, there's just so much that I'm learning. So you'll be hearing so many wonderful things about chess from these two, and I'll likely be like what he said. So that's me.
Thank you, Modupeola. I should say that one of the major messages, one of the major goals of Strategic Interplay, which I curated with help from Wendy Grossman, who was my co-conspirator, and is not with us today, but very much with us in spirit, because she was a major force in terms of conceiving Strategic Interplay. Really, the goal there was to raise the sort of profile of the strategic rigor, the sort of technical skill, the intellectual capacity of African artists. And I thought, well, gee, what better way to do it than through chess, which is commonly considered a pretty heady game. But now, Maurice, when we were at dinner last night, you shared a story with us about how you came into chess that you said you would not let go of, that was so meaningful to you. So if you could please give us a sense of your love for chess and some of what you have shared with the many communities that you have engaged with in terms of bridging chess and life in general. Could we turn to you?
Well, we talked about a lot of things last night, so I don't even remember what that story was. But I like to freestyle anyway. It's funny because I consider myself a non-artist. I have no artistic gene whatsoever. At least I would think so. I can't draw anything. I think I would make a stick figure look bad. But my son happens to be an artist. So how he got it, it's snuck in there somehow. I must have something. And I think that chess is art. I mean, maybe talk about chess as being sport, being science, being philosophy as well. But chess is art in that it is beautiful for those who can appreciate it. For those who explore its infinite possibilities and realize that this is a game that continues to enchant and engage folks from all walks of life. And a beautiful chess move catches your breath. A beautiful sequence engages the mind. And you can deeply appreciate the aesthetic value of an artistic game, those of us who are so in love with it. And we can see when it diverges from just the mechanical execution of moves and goes into the realm of the ethereal and the infinite, the untouchable, if you will. So for me, as a chess player growing up, I didn't know any of that. I was just a kid coming out of Jamaica, then moving to the United States when I was 12 years old, and then seeing people play in Brooklyn. A friend of mine was playing chess in Brooklyn Technical High School, where I went to school, and I knew the rules, but I didn't know anything else. I played him, and he crushed me. And then I saw a book, happened to see a book, didn't know there were chess books. Who knew there were like thousands of chess books? But didn't know there were chess books, found a book, started reading the book, thought I'd go back and beat my friend, went back to play him, and he crushed me again. Turns out he had read that book and a bunch of other books. And that's when I understood that knowledge was power and that I wanted that power. And that feeling for me that I was going to beat whoever was standing in front of me. And I describe chess, maybe a lot of people understand chess in these much more lofty terms, science and philosophy. But for us, and for me, growing up in Brooklyn, chess was a game where sharks ate other sharks. Because it was aggressive, it was trash talking, it was humiliation. Nobody cared about your feelings. Are you good or not? And sit down and play the game and prove yourself. And that required study. That required a rigorous approach, getting those chess books out and trying to decipher the language that many of you probably have heard, E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, what are they talking about? It sounds like some sort of Einsteinian equations of some type. But for us, it's just the language of the game. And to solve those mysteries, for me, was just a treasure and a pleasure. And it took me many years to start to unravel them and get to the level where finally I am now, which is an absolute beginner still. I'm just a more wise beginner, if you will, because you never conquer chess. You just fall deeper down the rabbit hole. And in fact, the deeper you go, the deeper you know it is. And those who don't know chess don't know those hidden depths even exist. So it really is like an explorer going into an ocean and then realizing, wow, there's more, and there are monsters down in the deep that you can't even conceive of. So it is that pleasure that I approach chess, that I have for chess, and approach chess with that inquiring mind at all times. And I say absolute beginner. I'm more an advanced beginner, and I think that one can appreciate art in that same way. Of what I've learned from my son anyway, is the curiosity that one can have about this object that you can interpret one way and then find that there's more hidden meaning, and everyone who sees it sees something different. So that means there's a capacity to engage on a multiplicity of levels. And that is what chess is for me. And so I guess there is a little bit of artist in me after all.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, Tunde, I am so enamored with what you do with the youth and Legos. And I know that you are moved to use chess as a tool to sort of advance the lives of those who may start off disadvantaged, but have a whole world of possibility open to them. Could you open us up with some perspectives of your own about chess as an educational tool, chess as a metaphor for life, chess as part of your passion, chess as part of your practice?
Thank you once again for the kind words. And honestly, it's a great honor to be with these two very remarkable individuals. Some 20 years ago, I saw a chessboard for the first time. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I lived all my life there. The first time I ever stepped on a plane and left the country was just 3 years ago. But chess gave me a way to see the world beyond the confines of where I grew up. And I didn't understand it at the time, because when I was 10, there was no money to go to school anymore. And my parents called me and told me that, see, this is it. You have to you have to get a job, to support the family. And I was 10. I didn't understand how different we were in society at the time. I knew my parents struggled. They also weren't educated. So to a degree, they didn't understand the value of education. So, but they wanted us to get the best. They wanted us to get an education. And my mom used to say something then in Yoruba, in my language. She would say, "Mo fẹ́ kí ìwọ náà tó bá ti dàgbà kó lè sọ̀rọ̀ láàrin àwọn ẹgbẹ́." Translation in English meant, I want you to be able to speak amongst your peers, when you're much older, so you don't serve them. And it was something that meant a lot to her, because she didn't want us to go through the same cycle, which she did, And so it was quite baffling that at that point I had to drop out of school, But I knew deep down that my parents really wanted us to get an education, but it just wasn't possible. We only had enough to feed. And that was it. And in those years that I was out of school, we were doing a lot of menial jobs, to support the family. I walked into a barber shop, and I saw a chessboard there for the first time. And the barber was just in one small corner, playing and reading a book. And I was immediately fascinated by the pieces, the way they were carved. I remember seeing the knight, and I thought, oh, this is a donkey. And the barber laughed and told me, no, it's not a donkey, it's a knight. And I said, okay, so what does it do? And it just told me to watch. And because I had a lot of questions. I was a very curious child. I could barely speak any English word. So I was very curious about the world. And I kept asking, and it would tell me to just watch. So I would always go there. I kept going back there to watch him and his friends play. And by watching, I was able to pick up the rules of the game. And when I was young, I was a bit more artistic. So I went back home and I got clay and I molded my own chess pieces. And I got a cardboard and I drew out the checkered squares and I put the notations. And I started to teach my younger brother how to play. So whatever I saw, I learned that I would go back and beat my brother, you know. And one day, they asked me to play. And I played and I lost in 2 moves. You know, I didn't even know it was possible to lose in 2 moves. I was like, wow. So it was fool's mate. And so it became my mission to find, you know, the defensive move. And he kept doing it again and again. And I kept losing like that. And I would go back home and I would try really hard to find a solution. And one day, I found it because it would never tell me what it was. And so I stopped losing in 2 moves. It became maybe 10. You know, and we kept playing, and at some point, I got a draw, and one day I won. So what chess did for me in those years, it helped me understand that I could also be intellectually inclined. It helped me learn that I could apply my mind in a way that I could control outcomes. So there are a lot of things, you know, about like the situation in which I was born into that I couldn't control. There were days that I would go to bed without food. I couldn't control that. The place where I was born, you know, the circumstance. But I found a world where I could escape to and I could control the outcomes. And my coach, the barber then would tell me that, it would tell me about consequences, and there was almost no element of luck. If you play well, you'd win. If you play badly, you'd lose. And you would know why you lost. And I was honestly enamored by that because I felt like I was in control for the first time. And, you know, needless to say, chess changed my life completely and it helped me understand my place in the world. And 7 years ago, I decided that I was going to do the same thing for other children like me, you know, that come from the very unlikely places, and use chess as a way to help them find their own identities. And, you know, I've done that for the last 7 years, and it's been, you know, by far, you know, the most important thing I've ever done with my life. And it's been a project that has deeply, deeply inspired the world and given all of us something new to believe in. And I believe there are many ways to think about the impact of chess, you know, just like, you know, Grandmaster Maurice Ashley said, it's art, it's science, it's love, it's everything, right? You get to decide what it means to you, and you get to give it expression in that way. But in the work that we do with the children, what I found is chess is just a means to several ends. It doesn't have to be the end in itself, right? Because the most important thing you can do for anyone is to find untapped potential, you know. And the potential is nothing if it's not realized, right? And you just enable them with high conviction. And you just watch them bend the trajectory of things. Because in Africa, there's this very typical approach of like handout, in a way to help. You're actually hurting the situation, you know, on a more long-term basis. So the best way to help someone isn't just by giving them handout. Is by helping them develop their own capacity and showing them literally what they can do. And being able to teach children from extreme poverty chess that have no education, that they can exert and use their minds in this way, you know, begins to like create this cascading effect to first learning chess, then understanding the value of learning, understanding the value of knowledge, building the discipline to study, and all of these things. And eventually, you know, liberates their mind. And when a mind is liberated, it finds true freedom. And that is how we've been using chess as a tool to help children from poverty find their place in the world as well.
Thank you so much. You know, chess and art together are also about choices and consequences and compromises, right? That Modupeola, when you are in front of a blank canvas, you've got to start somewhere, right? Maurice, when you are on the white side of the board, you've got to think through the first move you're going to make, right? And Tunde, the same for you. And even in the choices that you make in terms of how to introduce the game to the young people that you are exposing the game to for the very first time. How do you negotiate? And this is a question for all of you. How do you negotiate choice, compromise, consequence, and let's just also throw in there sacrifice, because that's part of the game too, right? We'll start with you, Tunde, maybe?
Oh, sacrifice. Okay, maybe I would speak a bit on sacrifice, because I think charity and sacrifice, they're very synonymous. And I remember when we started out the Chess and Slums project, I was 23. So it was a very hard decision, right? I had an idea that chess can be a way to empower children, give them an identity. And if they show great aptitude for chess, then it will give us a reason to believe in their capacity and give them the opportunity they deserve, right? And I'm framing it like this so we understand that, there are two ways to really understand the situation of poverty, right? You say a child in extreme poverty, and the first emotion that we have is pity. Like, okay. And sometimes it helps, because now, you pity this child, you pity this situation, and you want to do something to support, in the very minimal ways that you can. But there's another way to understand the situation, that when you see that child, you have deep empathy for them, right? But when you see a child, despite all of the, difficulty, despite the situation, they're still showing great aptitude for chess. I think the feeling is a bit different, right? It goes from just pitying them to actually seeing that there's some basis, like this child is able to do what even I cannot do, right? So really the gap is opportunity, right? That potential is universal, but that opportunity is the gap, right? And I saw that in my first few interactions with the kids. And they were showing great aptitude for chess, great aptitude for all of the things I wanted to teach them. I was like, wow, then why are we ignoring this? So I had to make a decision, really, that do I want to spend the best years of my youth trying to serve people that cannot pay me? Or do I go and figure myself out and just sort myself out, rather, than come back, and give back to the children and serve them? It was a very hard choice, mostly because of my own situation. So my parents, my family, also being the first child, everyone had this huge expectations, that I have to succeed so I could save my family from poverty. But yeah, I was, still impoverished myself, but trying to help children, even when I had nothing. And I think it's the real beauty of life, that we find the talents that we have, the skills that we have, the education that we have, the privilege, but when we use it for ourselves, it can bring us personal success. And there is nothing wrong with that. Every single one of us in this room, we've had some privilege, right? You have some ability, you have something that makes you relevant in the world. But the truth is, there are several millions of other people that do not have that by no fault of theirs, right? But the moment you take that talent and that skill and that education, that privilege, and you give it to the other person, it becomes a gift to them, right? And which is how I framed it. Like, this talent would serve me. I had a chance to leave the country and work as a chess coach in the UK and compete, and all of that. But yeah, I had the opportunity to use my talent and give it to the other person. And when you give it to the other person, it becomes a gift to them. And really, this is how our civilization has advanced. That men and women of great talent, of great knowledge, of great skill, built that, nurtured it, and when the time was right, they gave it back to the world. And every single thing we see, in this world right now, right, is a manifestation of that. And so that sacrifice was necessary. And it was a very hard one, again. But in doing that, I found a way to live the best part of myself and my essence, with the children, right? And this last 7 years, we've helped over 10,000 children, get scholarships. We have a program that supports over 100,000 children across Africa. Then I have chess programs, and it's been deeply fulfilling. But that sacrifice was absolutely necessary. And in the game of chess, the pieces have very specific values. The queen has a value of 9 points. The rook has a value of 5. The bishop 3. The knight 3, and the pawn 1. And the king is invaluable. So clearly the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard, like a woman, and you don't want to lose your queen. But there are some times in the game where you have to keep up the queen for a much greater advantage, which is the reason for the game, which is to be able to checkmate your opponent's king. And if it comes down to the wire, you need to give up all of your pieces to achieve that one goal, and it becomes worth it in the end. So I think the sacrifice back then, it was hard, but in hindsight now, it was an absolutely necessary one, and it is one that has completely defined, my purpose on earth.
Thank you. Wow. Indeed. Modupeola, in art, compromise, consequences, choices, and sacrifice.
I think I'll start from maybe the point of being in the studio and the number of choices one has to make when looking at a canvas, knowing where to start, and perhaps more importantly, where to stop. People ask me all the time, when do you know when a work is finished? And for me, it's been deadlines. Deadlines help a lot. Otherwise, I am like a chronic overthinker, and I will keep going back to it and reworking the surfaces. And so when a gallery says, we need these works by so-and-so date, it helps me to focus, and that's a helpful constraint. In terms of then putting the work out into the world and sharing it, because creating the work is one thing, and it's beautiful, and it's infinite, and there's so many possibilities. Actually, I'll stay on production, because it's kind of interesting. At some point, I had to give myself a bit of a constraint. So for 3 years, and I've just come out of this cycle, or this season, I decided to paint with only bronze and gold. Those two monochrome metallic palettes, and that was my constraint. And I was thinking to myself, even within that very limited constraint, there are still infinite number of possibilities. It was fun while it lasted. I explored lots of texture, and I was able to just go down a rabbit hole with even beads, just so many different things, but still with bronze and gold as the limitation. In the last few months, I've come back into color, which is quite fun. The studio feels different, everything feels really vibrant, but it was a helpful exercise as an artist to give myself that constraint. Now, sharing the work with the world is something else entirely. You don't know how it's going to be received. If I take the work that I have in the exhibition now, I created that work in 2013, and there were 5 pieces. There are 3 on display here, but one of my sort of mentors and collectors at the time said, this is such a powerful body of work, it belongs in a museum. Whatever you do, don't sell it. And make sure that if you must, make sure it goes to a museum, and make sure they all go together. And there were a lot of offers that came, and so it's just something I remembered, to your point about strategy. And so, to my wonderful surprise, when Lanisa reached out early last year to say, do you have some work on chess? And this was basically from a presentation that I had done at the Smithsonian whilst Lanisa was still there. It was a PowerPoint presentation that I gave maybe the day before the pandemic, the day before everything shut down, like March 13th or something. And she remembered it and decided to include it in the exhibition, and that's how we all find ourselves together today. So even just thinking about the things that you might set out with a strategy for, but you have no idea how it's all going to come together and where the connective threads will be, that is something I've learned to let go of as an artist when I put the work out for the world to experience. And the same has been with, my paintings. I decided to, on a whim and guided by a hunch, once again, create a film. As someone who's a painter, I paint largely, for the last 10 years, I've been painting swimmers and the topic of swimming and water and all of its ramifications. But I decided to do a film in 2018 on a group of synchronized swimmers from Harlem. They are senior citizens. The youngest member was 65 at the time. The oldest member will be 103 on Tuesday, Ms. Latisse. And I was just so fascinated by this group of swimmers in Harlem called the Harlem Honeys and Bears. The honeys are the women, the bears are the men, so it's co-ed for senior citizens, and they are synchronized swimmers, and they are every bit as adorable as they sound. And so I got to shadow them over the summer, and they invited me to their barbecues, their practices, really let me into their lives. And I chose 5 of them to paint and hired a film crew because I thought something is going to be very interesting and funny, like some of the things you can't even make up. And we documented a 17-minute film, which ended up winning an Emmy Award 5 years after the fact. So again, you do these things because, for me, that film was guided by the fact that I wanted to tell a much deeper story. I am Nigerian, I was born in Togo, I grew up really everywhere. I feel like I don't really belong to any place as such. And so I go into many places as an observer. And they just had such a beautiful story to tell that I thought couldn't be contained by 2-dimensional paintings. And so I created this film, and it just ended up having a life of its own. But I do think that everything that I do is really about sort of education and access and seeing things differently, and hoping that in presenting something differently to people, they could see things differently and perhaps act differently. Yeah.
Thank you. Modupeola is somewhat modest here. Modest in the sense that when she talks about education being at the center of her work, she is a Harvard University trained educator and has incorporated game theory in some of her creative practice. And so it's this very intentional effort to sort of use art as an effective tool to reach even younger audiences and have them engaged in the arts of Africa through her own creative practice. I think it's important to note that distinction in terms of your total creative oeuvre. And then, of course, we have Maurice Ashley, who, as we know, is a grandmaster and probably could give us a book on compromise and sacrifice and choices. But since we have you here, we'll go without the book and perhaps receive your guidance through your voice on these subjects.
I love the way you ask questions that could take an hour to answer. Because that's some deep questions, deep topics as well. There are some things that flashed into my head in listening to my esteemed colleagues. It reminded me of some stories. I'll start with, I was just in Italy, in Florence, and I was at the gallery where the Michelangelo's David is giant. As I mentioned, my son's an artist, so he's really educated me in the world. I can't use the word educated. That's like an extreme way of describing it, since I'm so ignorant about the field. But he's the one who brings me in day by day with his insights. But there was a quote that Michelangelo said about, I'm sure the art aficionados know this quote, about what he said was that he was trying, when he sees a block of marble, to discover the angel in the marble. That it wasn't his job to actually go in there with intent that this is what I want to do, but actually that there was infinite possibilities with that marble, and his job was just to start chipping away until he chipped away and found the angel. Yeah. And I think that speaks to creativity and the process of creativity, because you're not always sure what you want to do when you first sit down at the board. You might think you have an idea, but here's the situation with constraint is that in chess, you have an opponent sitting across from you. And so good luck with your desire to be able to create whatever you want and your ideas, because here's an opponent who's trying to counter those ideas. And you are co-creating art in this way, because it's a battle of the minds, and you hope you have a skillful enough opponent to be able to take the conversation and that particular engagement on the next level and a higher level and a higher level, because you can engage in that kind of sophisticated dialogue. And in fact, the world champion, Alexander Alekhine, he was actually the 4th world champion. He would get angry at his opponents when they played bad moves, because he had a brilliant idea he was trying to show, and it was just going to be absolute genius, and it was going to be remembered forever. And then his opponent would play some chanky, ugly move that he would just defeat easily. And he's like, why didn't you play the other move? He said, well, that move loses. Yeah, but it's prettier. I mean, gorgeous, right, and memorable. So the act in chess is you cannot create on your own, and you are constrained by the moves of your opponent. And then one thinks that calculation in chess is this critical component, which it is, but oftentimes it's intuition. Oftentimes it's whimsy. Many times it's just a hunch. And I'm reminded of Mikhail Tal, who was also a world champion. He tells a very famous story, or at least it's among chess players, where he was trying to figure something out of the board, and he couldn't figure it out. He was calculating and calculating and trying to look deeper and trying to look deeper, and he couldn't figure out what the best move was. And while he's sitting there trying to figure out the darn best move in the position, a poem came to his mind. And it was a poem about a hippopotamus stuck in a bog. And they were trying to figure out how to get the hippopotamus out the bog. And that's the poem, talking about this hippopotamus stuck in this bog. And he started stopping, thinking about calculating the chess position, and started trying to figure out, how do you get a hippopotamus out of a bog? And he's sitting there, and as he's sitting there thinking about this, the move occurred to him. And suddenly he said, oh, that's the move. And so where did this process, what is the process for finding creative ideas, for being able to express oneself in these creative ways, these artistic ways? It's personal. It's truly personal, right? And you are you. You're authentically you. It's you bringing your experiences to each circumstance, your journey. And as we all have individual journeys, and so we are in some ways constrained by who we are, but that is also our superpower, is to be able to express just who we are and not to try to be someone else, but to just be authentically you and let that process unfold. And then I think whatever the consequence may be, that is where your artistic expression will be found.
Oh, indeed. I want to pick up on something, and that is your point about intuition, right? Because I think there's a parallel, and Modupeola, I'd beg you to correct me if I'm wrong, where there's, on one hand, very definitely intuition at play, but then also strategy as well. So in the game of chess, in the practice of art and in education, is there a definitive line? Do you know when you're slipping from strategic thought into intuition? Can you feel it happening? I'm posing the question to you only because you've raised it, but Modupeola, Tunde, please feel free.
I don't think it's something that you do.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary to separate the two. You can't overemphasize strategic rigor and hard brute force calculation because the game is too complicated to figure out through those means alone. There's some positions that you can definitively say, this, I win, yes. But those are easy positions, what we would call easy positions, even if it's not easy for lower rated players. But the reality is that humans only think when we don't have to. Right? I mean, if you're going to go home a way you've gone home 1,000 times, you're not going to stop and think about, okay, so how do I go home from here? You're going to get in your car, you're going to start driving. You might not even remember you were driving home because you were thinking about something else. And you just went on automatic pilot. It's similar to Daniel Kahneman's book, Think Fast, Think Slow. If we can just think fast like this, we're there. We're just lazy, and chess players can be lazy too. The pattern is obvious, and we go in that route. But it's when we don't know what to do that we stop and start thinking about it. Yeah. And if I ask you what's your name, you're not going to think about it. You just say it, right? But if I ask you what's 295 times 102, now, unless you already thought about this problem, you will have to stop and think. I see your laughter.
Yeah, who's got the answer?
My brother is a physicist. Probably can figure that out.
So the point is that the blending of intuition and rigorous calculation is part of the human process.
Part of it is.
And so you don't have to slip into one or the other. Whatever you need to do to solve the problem, the hippopotamus in the bog, then go there and feel that. And so you don't want to start thinking about thinking, right? Like, or to think about thinking, like, how am I thinking right now? What is my process? Sometimes you will stop and do that because you might have to stop yourself because you realize that you're in a thought loop and you are stuck, and then you're looking at the clock, which is another constraint in chess because our games are timed, and you realize, whoa, I'm thinking too much. So I have to stop and just play and just flow, especially when your time starts to go really low. And that in that way we train ourselves to just flow. And that also is its own thing because people are able to just flow and realize that you play great moves when you're in flow and quickly as much as when you have a ton of time.
Sure.
And you have a chance to think about it deeply.
Sure. Is it the same in art, Modupeola?
I think in life, what comes to me is the idea of a program, so to speak, that I came up with called the artist algorithm. And the idea is that as an artist, it's whimsy, it's hunches, there's a lot of intuition, and an algorithm by definition is a series of steps that you take to solve a problem. It's very sort of engineering, it's mathematical, it's methodical. But the idea that these two things can be happening at once and maybe necessarily they have to happen at once, and they switch sort of second by second or millisecond by second, and trying to separate them, I don't know if it's fully helpful. I think separating them to understand what's happening is helpful, but in the moment, you can't really separate them. And I think I would, maybe in a word, call it wisdom, right? Like, what is wisdom? Being able to apply something, using some level of discernment to be like, where am I? I'm in a museum. Today is February 1st. It's afternoon. Like, knowing exactly where you are at a given time, like, in such a place or time as this, what is happening and what move do I make next? It's not the same move your mom made. Mm-hmm. It's not even the same move you would have made yesterday. And so understanding that specificity of time and space and having the wisdom and discernment to move forward is something that I think requires like stillness, some presence,
Indeed.
And like he said, flow.
Which, by the way, the term would be for us situational awareness.
He said.
Which is as powerful as anything else. As looking, many times you think you have to look 20 moves ahead, but you describe perfectly what's happening in this moment. If I can make a great decision now, I'll make the great decision in the next moment, and onwards.
Yeah. Tunde?
Yeah, just to add to the conversation, I remember the World Championship match in, was it 20? The one between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana.
That was 2016.
2016, yes. So it was like the American champion, Fabiano Caruana, and one of the greatest, probably arguably the greatest player to ever play the game, Magnus Carlsen from Norway. And so it was a 12-game classical match where, they sat there for hours and hours and really tough. And at the end of the 12th game, it was a draw. And they had to make a decision, right? So after the classical games, after the series of matches, they go on to faster time controls. You have the rapid time controls. And if a winner still doesn't emerge, then you have blitz. Then you have a Armageddon. Now, we could pretty much see that, at the time, they were very evenly matched in strength, right? But when the time control changed after the classical games, it now became a question of who had the best intuitive feel for positions and had to make very rapid decisions with very limited time. And of course, Carlsen won easily. And Magnus Carlsen, again, arguably one of the greatest players to ever play the game. And I think that is one edge he has over every other player, both living or dead. This very strong sense, this very strong feel for the position. And intuition for me is a compass that gives you different perspective. And I like to say this, like the science of what we do and the impact, for the children that we train is, it's in the synapses, right? The science says this is how chess enhances, cognitive abilities, critical thinking, all of that. And for the first few years of working with children, it was always really hard because if a child is not learning the way you're teaching them, you have to teach them only in the way that they can learn, right? So I was very hyper-focused on using chess as a tool for them to be good players, but for it to also become a means to several ends for them to really understand the complexity of their minds and have those frameworks for decision making. And I was so fixated on that for the first 3 years. And of course, we made a lot of progress, but the real challenge was we couldn't communicate the essence or the value of that to people. So we're doing great work, and I was seeing it, like seeing the kids go from 0 to 1, but then nobody cared about it. It was like chess in slums. What does that even mean? Like, why do you think chess is relevant to children in the slums? Just give them food. And so it was a very hard question for me to answer when people would say, how does chess put food on the table for a child in poverty? And I didn't know how to answer it then, but I could see the progress they had made, in their education, even in being able to even use interesting terminologies like prophylaxis, being able to now speak English a lot better. But I couldn't really find the right language to articulate that and help people understand the value of what we're doing until there was a shift in perspective. And this was what happened. And this is what revolutionized the entire idea that we had to use chess as a tool to change the world and impact lives. It was just something very simple. And it was something that intuitively happened, right? So we went to this new community in Lagos, one of the worst ghettos and slums, very dangerous place. You cannot be there at night. It's called Oshodi Underbridge. It's a den for thieves, criminals. They've robbed, killed people there. It's just a very horrible situation, and it's been there for decades. You can imagine how horrible it is that even the government cannot do anything about it, right? So every homeless kid, every orphan kid, that becomes rebellious, they end up there. So there's a lot of cultism, hard drugs, and during elections, politicians will come there, give them stipends to disrupt elections and all of that. So it was a real problem, for Lagos. And I went there one day with a chessboard, and I said I wanted to teach the children there how to play chess. And it could be one way to save them. And, last night I was talking about the single story, right? And there was Chimamanda that said at first that there's no single story about any people or any place. And if you really, really, really get to know someone's story, then you can learn to love them. And this is something I was very curious about. I wanted to understand the transition because we call them area boys. They're hoodlums, they're thugs, they're criminals. So we call them area boys in Lagos. How does a child become an area boy? At what point do they lose their innocence and become completely radicalized by that situation? Because they have to become so much harder than their situation to survive on the street. But the street was going to be the only place that would embrace them. I would spend the next 7 months there, teaching these kids every day, helping them. And at some point, we were able to break through, and they became a bit more vulnerable, right? And the change happened. And it became one of the most phenomenal success stories of children that had been completely overlooked, to not just becoming very good chess players, but now understanding that they could do better and wanted a different life for themselves. It's been 3 years since we did this project, and there were 50 of them. And I can say proudly today that, a couple of them will be coming to the US in March. One of them rebuilt the entire website for chess in slums. A lot of them are in school, universities, and vocational schools as well. And it was a truly transformative project. But what changed that helped us really capture, the world's attention? It was just a very simple thing. Remember, the focus had always been on the cognitive benefits of chess and this and that and this. But on the day at the end of the project, we wanted to do a tournament for the kids. And I started to think to myself that, what can we do differently? Right? These kids are going to show up, they're going to play chess, and people are going to see that they have great aptitude for it. The problem was, a lot of people didn't play chess or understood the value. So we did just one simple thing, right? We decided that on the day of the tournament, we're going to dress them up like this. And they wore like, this is an agbada I'm wearing, and we gave them caps as well. And these are kids that, they're always wearing tattered clothes on the streets, they can be easily overlooked, or when when they walk up to you, you're afraid. You don't want to interact with them. And by just dignifying their stories and helping them really represent the prestige that chess had, we had the tournament and they were so elegantly dressed. And the moment I posted the pictures, and I just put out the caption and said, it wasn't going to be, chess helped these children. It was just, I just put out the caption that we are all area boys. And for something that had always been a derogatory term for the longest time, gave us a new basis for empathy. And not in the old ways in which we had seen them from a distance, but we saw that they could look like us. They could dress like us. And the impact, the change felt a bit more tangible. And that moment was truly revolutionary for the project and helped us find a way to not just dignify the stories of the children that we were serving and advocating for, but it gave the world a new way to see the story of becoming. And on a final note, and that is the beauty of chess, what I consider the greatest miracle of chess as well, that the pawn, is the least valuable piece. But if you march it up until the final rank, it undergoes a transformation. It can become any other piece, but it can also become the queen, the most powerful piece, right? And I think, that is the story of the African child, from poverty, that it is not just a story about poverty in itself, but it's a story of becoming. And if we can help people find the right perspective to understanding that through a lens of empathy, then we can truly change the world, right? And to bring this back to context, it was just a sense of being able to change the lens. What we did for 3 years prior to that time was the same thing we did on that day, but being able to just shift that perspective, and having a true feel for that moment, it changed everything. So leaning into your intuition really isn't just understanding something through the knowledge and experiences that you have. It's just knowing in that moment, that specific moment, there's a different way to feel. And when you do that, I think you find expression in a different way. And it's always better.
Thank you, Tunde. Thank you. Wow. Sort of got chills as you were describing the experience of area boys being promoted even through chess. Just wow. I'm burning with so many more questions, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to reduce it to just one. I would, if time permitted, I would raise questions about just sort of the sort of chess as a vehicle or tool for political commentary. Chess is a reflection of, popular attitudes of any given sort of historical moment. We have, for example, in the exhibition, 2 chess sets that were carved by artisans in France that depict Europeans versus Africans. And we know that there were many chess sets of this nature that are really a reflection of the time. These are 19th century chess sets in the exhibition. But in the interest of time, I will reduce it to just one question. I mean, I'd love to know, Maurice, Modupeola, Tunde, what drives you most, whether it's the process or the outcome. But again, we're limited to time, so I'm going to just put this one, which is on the subject of winning. Winning in chess, winning in art, winning in life. What does it take, and how do you know when you are doing it? Does it have a feel? Does it have a taste? Can you smell it? I mean, can you sense when your opponent is shivering? Modupeola, when you are in front of that canvas and you are putting the final touch, are you like, I did that, yes! I mean, what does it take to win, and how do you know that you are doing it? How do you know when you're doing it? Modupeola, may we start with you, please?
Because I need this question the most. I think in front of the canvas, finishing a work and letting it go actually feels a lot more sad to me than, maybe one would expect. But my brother is here, came from Boston to support me today, and we were talking about just strategies and different things that I have as winning aspirations, if you will, for myself in my career in the near future. And I was talking about having a museum exhibition and how that's sort of like the ultimate thing for artists. I've had many exhibitions, and they've been successful ones, but I was saying I really want to have a museum exhibition. And so he goes, so what are we going to today? Is your work there? I said, yeah. And he was like, so is that a museum exhibition? And it never occurred to me that, yes, it is. And so maybe to answer your question, it's actually stopping to realize that you are winning and that you're in the very vision that you set out for yourself 11 years ago. And sitting with that, like really, really, really sitting with that for enough time for the gratitude to show.
Indeed. Maurice?
Yes, when you said the smell, can you smell? I thought, can you smell what The Rock is cooking?
This guy.
I mean, are they sweating? Are your opponents sweating over there when they're
I don't really want to smell my opponent's
opponent's
sweat. Thank you, Lanisa. That is not something I'm interested in figuring out. But I think there's a word, the most important word in my lexicon, and that's gratitude. You're winning every day if you're grateful. And so it's each and every day. It's the process. And it's your own, as I mentioned, journey. It's your authenticity that you're tapping into. You cannot be someone else. You are the only version of this being that will ever exist. And so your job is not to compare yourself to others. Comparison is the thief of joy. But it is to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be, and that is defined by you. So for me, as long as I am staying true to my North Star, as long as I wake up knowing that I'm following my own ethical standards, that I am in service of the people that I love or I want to have an impact on, I can't even call it winning because I already won so many times over. And I don't really need to win. I just need to be satisfied, to be grateful, to be joyous, to be happy. And there is no real, you talked about algorithm. There's a great book I just finished reading called The Algebra of Happiness by Scott Galloway. And those of you, it's worth a read. He's a little bit of a skeptic, and he's an economist. And so it's not as mathematically rigorous as it sounds. Trust me, it's very whimsical, the book, despite the title. But he talks about that as well. It's, you're rich if your money in is greater than your money out. I don't care what number that is, as long as you're spending within your means and happy with that. So I know when I'm winning, when I'm not, when I'm being myself, when I'm not verging away from my truth, or truths, I will say, because there's so many of them that they even conflict with one another, but it's just my voice. And as long as I'm feeling and following my voice, then I know I'm okay.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Tunde?
Okay, I wanted to speak a bit about actual winning in chess because I think the feeling and the excitement that comes from that euphoria when you know that you have your opponent on the ropes, it can be a trap and you can get easily excited. And I think it is also like a reflection of like even the human condition and how I remember I was playing this tournament some 7 years ago. It was against the national champion, and I had a winning position. This game had gone on for about 4 hours. It was a really, really difficult game. And I finally had a winning position after 4 hours of this grueling duel, and just the marginal the marginal positional advantages that had like accrued over time. Because at the very highest level in chess, nobody's going to blunder their queen. Like, oh, I didn't see that. That's it. No, it's the very, very marginal things, changes that happen, eventually compounds, and eventually like results in victory. And that happened for 4 hours, and I was winning, and I stood up, and I just went to like watch other games, and I came back, and I had to find the final move in that moment. And I still had a lot of time, but in that split second, remember we had spent 4 hours thinking, trying to get that advantage, and as soon as I got it, I just needed to think for maybe an extra 10 seconds. But because I was a little excited, I played the only move on the board, that would lose. And I lost that game. And it was extremely painful. There are very few things in the world that can break you psychologically, like losing a winning position in chess. Very few things. And which is why I think a lot of people do not have the courage to play chess. Because chess is a great game, but then it requires a lot of courage and the humility that comes with losing sometimes. Oh my goodness. It is the best way to teach your children to understand and prepare for failure, honestly. So anyway, the lesson I learned from that really was, and I stopped playing chess for that reason, because of that game. And it took me years before I could go back to the game. And that was the wrong mindset. And it's probably why, I never became a grandmaster. And I'm a strong player in my own right, but it taught me an important lesson. I couldn't push through that. It was completely shattering for me. Now, in the work that I do, it had that experience. I was able to construct some meaning out of it. And it's really informed, the work that I do right now, because there's a lot of problems in Africa. And when I started, I had this great dream that, I could use chess as a tool to start some sort of like intellectual revolution for our children, and if we can do that, if we can hit some critical mass, then we can have a new generation of young Africans that will challenge the status quo. For a continent that is so blessed, how do we live in such extreme poverty? Because of bad leadership, right? And I thought, that the work that I wanted to do then should matter to the world for that reason. But with time, I realized that I became a bit more accepting, a bit more jaded, and realized that, boy, the problems are very complex. Yes, maybe we helped 10,000 children, but there's still like 20 million children in Nigeria alone that cannot go to school. And you tend to feel very small. And you begin to really ask those questions like, am I really winning? Am I really solving this problem? Am I really making any progress? But then I stumbled on this story that literally just changed everything. And it was the story of this little kid, that was walking by the ocean. And the ocean had washed off thousands, millions of starfishes to shore. And it was picking them up one by one, and it was throwing them back into the ocean. And some man from a distance was watching and said, why are you doing this? It doesn't matter. Like, you're never going to be able to throw all of them back in. Right? So it's just a waste of time. Why even bother at all? And the kid just looked at him like this and picked up another starfish and said, it would matter to this one. And he threw it back into the ocean, and it just continued. And I couldn't stop thinking about that, because when we think about the complexity of the problem of our lives or the things that we need to do, we could feel really small, and it's hard to like measure, the progress that we're making, right? And it's hard to really be in tune with the things that we should actually be proud of, right? We're too hyper-focused on all the wrong things, right? And it kind of changed my perspective, right? To see that even if I'm unable to solve, the problem at that scale, it will matter to the one child. And by doing that, I can go home and I can feel fulfilled in the work that I've done, that to a degree, I have become a part of this person's story. And it could be the one thing that would change their life. And maybe if that child becomes very powerful or successful, then it could change the lives of so many other people. And really, that is how the world has advanced. Very little changes by people in different capacities has created the snowball effect. And, the world as we know it now is different because of all of those things that have compounded. So winning really doesn't have to be a grand thing. It doesn't even have to be at the scale at which we have our own expectations. It can be in the little things. And as long as you define that with the right perspective and you find fulfillment in all of the little things, then I think that is true victory. Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'd love to receive your questions. Are there any from the floor? Any hands up? As you are working to raise your hands, I think it's appropriate to acknowledge the Woodberries. The Woodberries run a chess program here in Toledo. They are doing the good work, Tunde, that you were doing. Maurice, you haven't mentioned much of it, but Maurice is also very committed to just grooming a successor generation of chess grandmasters through his work. And the Woodberries are local here in Toledo doing the same thing. Of course, we've got our brother from Boston supporting Modupeola. I've got my two here, Leah and Levi Valentine. One of them is a chess enthusiast. The other introduced the younger one to it. So there are so many people in the room who I think are naturally part of this conversation, either directly through relation or indirectly through a love of art or through the love of chess, and we'd love your questions. Do I see any hands? I've got my glasses on for close up, but whose hand is up? I'll walk the mic to you. All right. Let me take the mic here. Was it your hand? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here today. When I've read about the history of chess and how the way the pieces move has changed over time, and I see the different variants of chess that are played today, I'm wondering, from your perspective, do you think the game can be improved at all? And if so, is there a change in the rules you would make or a piece that could move differently? Do you think the game is as good as it can be?
It's an interesting question. I think that the game is sufficiently complex that we have not solved it. Computers have not solved it. And so as long as it's continuing to engage us as it has, you probably don't need to mess with a good thing. But I'm sure if you make rule changes that today's kids would see it as the way the game is played. Just like when they made rule changes in the past, the adults complained, but the kids thought it was cool. I think that's just typical, right? That you can make any change you want, the new generation will just pick it up. And so I don't think it's necessary right now, but now they're starting to do things like freestyle chess, where the position on the back rank is randomized. It's actually called Chess 960 official random. Where the position on the back rank, instead of it being the set position we have now, you can play around and do any position on the back rank with a couple of constraints. And I think that's just as much chess as anything, as long as the pieces are still the pieces what they are. But then you have something like S-chess where you have a combination of pieces, like a knight and a bishop become one piece, or a rook and a knight becomes a super piece. They combine. So I think you could play around. The game is so infinite that you can play around. I'm not sure you would call it better, but you just called it fun.
Are there other hands up here? Thank you.
Hello, panel. It's nice to meet you. My name is Dexter Rose, and I'm a novice chess player. Nice to meet you, Maurice. I follow you online also. What would you give advice to somebody like me to become a better chess player? Also, is I guess a two-part question, because sometimes you see like really great players, like a Bobby Fischer or something. It's like, it seemed like he kind of went into madness over chess. I don't know if that's what it was, but it seemed like, I guess he's so smart and just so out there. It's like sometimes I feel like you got to step away from the game, but also is there, when there's a time to step away, to take a break from it, or to try to be a better player, I guess. I don't know, that sounds complicated.
Is that for me?
Yes.
Well, I don't think that you can look at Tunde or myself and think that we're mad or crazy.
It's debatable. It's debatable.
I mean, maybe you're not realize that you're crazy in your own mind. When I look at Tunde, I don't think he's crazy. So I think, and a lot of chess players, the vast majority of chess players are not on the deep end. The media likes to hype it up because when you have genius, it's nice to equate that with madness as well. A Beautiful Mind, for example, if those of you who have seen that movie, it's good hype. It's good hype. But most chess players love the game and are pretty self-aware, top ones that I know, and are pretty engaging people. As far as becoming better at chess, it's a long journey. I don't know your level, so I can't say exactly what it is that you should be doing. But I do know that the most important things you should focus on will undoubtedly be linked to learning some tactics, basic tactics, and their tactical ideas that, when I say tactics, you will know when you start looking it up what I'm talking about, whether it's pins, skewers, forks, interference tactics, and the like. Online, there are lots of resources, and there are a couple of places to go to. Chess.com is the most popular place that people go to. Lichess, lichess.org is another popular place. And if you just look at basic tactics, you'll see that that has actually been systematized in a way where you can just start at the beginning and take those steps. So that's a broad answer to your question. I'm not being very specific there, except to say start the journey. Start the journey, and you'll see things that you don't know, and you just start learning each and every day. But it'll be tactics. It'll also be strategy. And especially the end game, you definitely want to know how to finish people off, because what's the point of having a great game and you don't know how to finish them off when it comes to the end? But those sites are really good at putting that information together beyond books, which I love books, and I have hundreds of books in my library. But nowadays, everybody's online and doing everything digitally, and it's a very efficient way of doing it. My favorite book is an old book. You have a book?
Yeah, The French Defense.
No, absolutely not. He's joking. Answer to that is no. No, the book I would recommend for you, we have a strong player over there, the little 10-year-old Levi, who is Nissa's son, who's quite strong.
Yeah.
He's a 1,500 player, which, trust me, and he can also play blindfold in his mind already. So watch out for this little kid named Levi. But there's a book called Logical Chess, Move by
Irving
Move.
Chenevert.
By Irving Chenevert.
Irving Chenevert.
Logical Chess, Move by Move. It's kind of funny because I have my own book called Move by Move, but it's an adult book on the metaphorical intimacy between chess and life. So it's not going to make you a better chess player, although it might make you a better thinker. But Logical Chess, Move by Move is a great book because it explains and explains and re-explains the game so that when you're finally done, you get it. And so that's a book I would recommend if they still have it in print. It's an old book, but it's worth reading.
Yes, as an artist, what is your biggest challenge that you faced during your time, and how did you overcome some of those biggest things in chess or just in winning?
Is that my question?
It could be for anyone.
Well,
What was the question?
Modupeola, we're going to give it to you. The question is, as an artist, what is some of the biggest challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges that you may have faced? Is that right? And how do you overcome them? That one's for you, Modupeola.
As an artist, I think just not having enough time to create everything I want to create. I have a very rich inner life with my art. And, people talk about having writer's block or like, do I ever get stuck And in terms of creating, the answer is a resounding no. I have more ideas and more things that I want to bring to life than I have time for. So that feels like a challenge sometimes. That's the biggest challenge. It's a pretty good place to be in. Yeah, good problem to have.
All right, I'm walking the floor with the mic. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, right here? Oh, Mr. Woodbury, yes.
First of all, I want to thank Lanza and the museum for giving us the opportunity to have royalty of chess in our city. All officials that are involved with chess, coaches, instructors, please raise your hand.
Oh, wow.
Cameraman, your hands up. I've invited all the officials. We have more. They're qualified. Our program is Woodbury Park Chess and Art. So we had to be here. Now that I know that you were a barber, I was a barber. So we bonded. But right now, Mr. Ashley is well known in our class. And we respect you. You are the royalty to our city. We welcome you. And we will talk about you forever. And we hope that you will return one day to spread more knowledge. Maurice, I know you got stories. I know you got stories. We got stories. We have our Legos block by block, which is just as dangerous as in Legos. You follow me? And we've taught in the prison system, youth, we've had stories also, but we cannot rival Mr. Ashley's stories. We've seen some of them. He's got them. We got his whole website. It goes on and on. So we really appreciate you being here, and we hope that you will, in the future, give us a hand.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate
Thank
that.
you so much.
Sorry, excuse me. All right.
Hello, I'm Coach Brian Wilson from Detroit. This is a cross-section question. I know, Tunde, you had a experience of coaching chess to a kid who had cerebral palsy, and I kind of want you to kind of explain that process, because a lot of times our students are not what we think and how easy it should be. So can you kind of explain that process for us as well? And my second part question, I have my son Brian Wilson Jr. Was Detroit's highest rated player, and now he is an artist. And so that was something I had to support, knowing that he was going to eventually quit chess, and now he works for New Balance in Boston, the same place your brother works, and has his own clothing line, and he's doing his thing there. And so, Maurice, you also have a son that's an artist. So could you guys kind of talk about those similarities?
Who knew? Your cerebral palsy story.
Oh, okay, all right. So this was in 2021. So we wanted to expand our intervention to a new community. So we started from the community where I grew up, to a slum community called Modupeola in the Curator. So we wanted to go to another community to continue to scale the project. So we went to Makoko. Now Makoko is the largest floating slum in the world. It's over 300,000 people live on sewage. It's insane. You have to get around with a canoe. It's a really terrible place to be. And we went there. The first barrier that we had really was the language barrier. The children couldn't speak English. They also couldn't speak my own native Yoruba language. So they spoke a different variant, which is called Egun, right? Because they had they're mostly fishermen in the community. So they had migrated there, decades, hundreds of years ago, and they had settled there, for that long. So the greatest aspiration in that community for the children was for them to become fishermen. And that was just really the reality there. It was a very difficult one. And it was also somewhat of a conundrum, because you cannot remove 300 people. The government had tried to demolish the entire community for so many times, but the community fought back. And it's a conundrum because you can't remove them because their livelihood is directly tied to that community. And if you say, okay, fine, let us remove them, clean up the water, and bring them back to the place, then it becomes the Venice of Africa. And we all know how gentrification works and capitalism, and the poor people will never be able to live there again. So I thought, maybe the best thing is to just educate the children. And when you do that, then you can take a more long-term position. Because I believe that, in Africa, no one is coming to save us. Like the people that must change our situation must emerge from the same communities that they must serve. So I thought if we could really raise children, educate them, they would have a sense of duty back to that community. And it would be the only way to find, the solutions to it. So we went there and we selected about 100 kids. So our process is very simple. We do a quick vulnerability assessment. We select the children we want to work with in the community because we can't, teach everyone. We have very limited resource. Then we do a pilot phase for a month. We teach them 6 hours every day. So at the end of that 1 month, they go from absolute beginners to be able to play and checkmate even. Right, then we do a tournament, we celebrate them, we let them showcase what they've learned, and we set up a more permanent training center there, every Saturday. So the first day we did a vulnerability assessment and selected the kids. That boy, Ferdinand, his name is Ferdinand, wasn't there. So he was a kid in the community, he was 10 at the time, living with cerebral palsy. Couldn't speak, couldn't walk properly, and he was bullied in the community terribly. So for that reason, he wouldn't come out to play with his friends, so he missed out on the first day. But the second day, he came, and, I just heard some of the kids, telling him to go back and leave here, and it was still like the bullying. They kept telling him to leave there, that he didn't belong there, that, this was like chess, he shouldn't be there. But the boy was very curious, and he was just watching from a distance. And I saw him, and I called him, and I asked, oh, what's your name? And he couldn't respond. And I just took him to a class and told him to sit there and just watch. I didn't even have any expectation because I'd never really worked with a differently abled child. I wouldn't say disabled now, because now I know better about like the language, of definition. And after about an hour, the instructor for that class just came to me and he was crying. And I was like, oh, what is going on? What's wrong? He said, Tunde, come see something. So, and he brought me to the table, where the kid was. And apparently, he had given them this complex night geometry exercise to solve. And the boy was the only one who found it. And I couldn't believe that. And that was when I knew that it was a special kid, right? And he had a very sound mind, and chess literally was his first language. And he had never spoken a word, and immediately knew, that, okay, we had to keep an eye on him. And through the entire duration of the training, he became the best. And when we had the tournament, guess who won? Ferdinand, the little kid, in one of the largest floating slums in the world, that couldn't speak, that was bullied, terribly by the other kids. And he became a superstar. And the governor of Lagos State, met him, played chess against him, put him on scholarship, gave the family a lot of money, gave them a new house, all of the siblings, put them in school. And that changed the boy's life. And, in March, he's coming to New York in March for an event we're having. And, very strong player. I think he's 14 now. And a lot has happened since then. And back to your question about teaching children. That was my first experience. But of course, I've gone on to teach a lot of children. While I was in Mauritius, I was volunteering at the school for differently abled kids. And what I've found really is the burden of disability just makes the approach to learning different. Not necessarily difficult. Yes, difficult to get through a child, for example, that has a speech impairment. But it's like I said earlier, when you're trying to teach someone and they're not learning in the way that you're teaching them, you have to teach them only in the way that they can learn. And that is being able to find the very simple details, right, of learning for that child. Every child learns differently. For some of them, it could be visual. For some, it could be like practical. They want to be involved in pushing and doing all of that. For some of them, it's just like just listening to you, and they have very strong imagination, and they can pick up cues. So a good teacher must be able to listen to those little things, to be able to see those little things, and be able to apply that, in the interactions with a child. And that is what makes chess such a brilliant tool, because it transcends even the confines of disability. In a lot of cases, blind people can play chess. There are some blind people that I cannot even beat at chess. They're very strong, never had sight, right? But they're very strong 2-4 rated players. It's insane. So there has to be a way, to be able to teach that child, but it has to be tuned only in the way that they can learn. And if you have that approach, to teaching children that learn differently or that differently abled, I think you'll be able to make some progress.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe just one, possibly two more questions. Young man?
Well, my name is Levi Kitchiner Valentine. And my question was, like, Tunde, when you were talking about the area boys, is there any different feeling, like when you're playing in a tournament room and you're surrounded by people who don't really look like you? Is there any feeling that you have, any, like, uncomfortable ideas or something?
Very short answer, but I think the best person to answer that question should be Maurice Ashley. But my first experience of that was when I was 11. It was my first tournament, and it was the first time I ever left my community to go to another school to compete. And it was a school for expatriates in Nigeria. So there were a lot of like Indians, Chinese kids, and I was the only odd one there. And I remember I had this game against this Indian kid, and the coach kept coming to the table to tell him what to do. And because I could barely speak English, so I didn't know how to feel. I didn't even know that was wrong, but I ended up beating him anyways, even. and you can imagine how that made me feel, right? And it's this thing about like understanding your place in the world. And for people that look like us, the world will judge you for a lot of things, right? The world will judge you for how you're dressed, for the color of your skin. I mean, you're a child, but I know you're an old soul too. So I'll just tell you the fact. The world will judge you for the color of your skin, and that is true. And I mean, not everyone is like that. But the one thing that is a constant, right, is your ability, right? When you have great competence, that becomes undeniable. And no one can ever take that away from you, right? And you have to prove yourself, right? If you continue to do that, it becomes undeniable. And of course, there are all of the systems that would try to marginalize you, whatever. But you have to show great competence. And when you do that, you get your accolades eventually. And just also knowing that sometimes the place where you're from, is not where you belong. And Queen's Gambit, I saw this in Queen's Gambit, that you belong where you believe you belong. And when you decide what that place in the world is for you, then you have to like put your head high and just go for it and walk into those rooms and own it, right? You belong there because you've earned your place in it. And don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise, because at the end of the day, it's when you checkmate, the game is over, and it wouldn't matter where you're from or what you look like. Yeah.
As our program draws to a close, we've been talking so much about children, and it would be so inappropriate to miss the opportunity to just shine a light on some of the good work that the coaches in Toledo are doing, and some of the young chess players who are here in the audience, to see you, Maurice, you, Modupeola, you, Tunde, representing the city of Toledo. What's your name, young man?
Elijah.
Can we get a round of applause for Elijah? And what's your name?
My name is Parker.
All right, can we get a round of applause for Parker? All right, and your name?
Sully.
Sully. Can we get a round of applause for Sully? All right, thank you, Sully. And your name?
Miko.
All right, we got Miko?
Yes.
Miko, a round of applause for Miko. Thank you all. Toledo, Toledo's youth, Toledo Museum of Art, Maurice, Modupeola, Tunde, thank you 10,000 times.
Thank you.